Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 12th episode of the Magnum Opi podcast. We have been on a brief break, but we are back and raring to go with Clockwork Orange. With us today, we have, I think for the first time on this show, is iTunes Eye.
Hello, everybody.
We have Quackhouse.
Hello, my double jukes.
We have Brandig.
Good morning and happy Sunday from Texas.
Justine.
Good evening.
And Freelance Bishop.
Good evening.
Okay, let's get back into the swing of things by asking people what they thought of the book. I know there's a bit of a diverse opinion on this book on the panel, but Freelance, you want to hit us with the summary and then we'll see how people feel about it?
Well, there's Alex and his stooges, and they are basically young delinquents who live in a world where there's almost no order there's at least no strict order from the parents, so they're very violent. Alex is arrested, ratted out by his friends. He's sent to prison where everything is horrible, and then he can get out of prison by taking an experimental treatment, the Ludovico method. This renders him impotent to do any violence, so he becomes basically the punching bags for everybody, including his old mates. He tries to commit suicide, and then he's cured all right. The book itself has an epilogue where he actually redeems himself and decides to become a trad husband looking for a trad wife.
Yes, an epilogue that in America they were not gifted with.
Well, it's not a Kubrick movie, so that's why it's not known usually.
Yes. Which it's one of the few times where I think the editor might have made the right choice. To Anthony Burgess himself, it completely destroys the narrative because he, on the introduction that he wrote for what I was reading, he kind of describes it as a difference between it being a fable where there is no ultimate change in the narrator, to with there being a change in him, it becomes a novel. He thinks that change at the end is kind of crucial to the character development.
It's a complete U-turn from everything that's written in the book. And don't forget that the book itself is narrated by your humble narrator, Alex himself. So
that's very important.
The book maybe isn't that reliable in its retelling.
Yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of papers or like a deconstruction of the unreliable narrator of Clockwork Orange. But if we are taking him at his word, I do think it could have been better written, the epilogue, because it does seem like the change of heart comes out of nowhere. And I know, Brandig, that was one of your big criticisms.
Yeah, I don't know if we're going to get into it in more depth later, if you want me to trot it out right now to start with.
Let's get into it further, and then you can kind of hash it out. Good succinct summary from Freelance. Most people are probably going to know it from the film, but as we said, it does vary somewhat, particularly the ending. As usual, we're going to take a look at the author before we go further into the book. So, with Anthony Burgess, he is pretty prolific, not only in novels, but also in music, but most people will only know him from Clockwork Orange. I haven't got an influences tab like I usually do, but one of the things that was coming out when I was reading through some of the descriptions of him is how big a fan he was of James Joyce and how much he was one of the leading experts on him, which kind of makes sense with the writing style.
Yes, kind of surreal writing style.
Almost a stream of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
It's not quite in Clockwork Orange because it's more structured than something like Ulysses, but you can see there being strains of the same kind of narrative style.
I think one important thing to add about the book is just the style is so striking. I mean, Alex uses a slang which is hard for some people to understand. If you read it out aloud, I think that most of the words fall into place. But it has a lot of Russian influences. It has a lot of Cockney and Gypsy slang in it.
Yeah,
I think it's
sorry to interrupt on this
No,
point.
carry on.
Is this how you use colloquial language in the UK? Is it like that, or
Some of it.
Yeah,
foreigner?
it's not far off, to be honest. I think it's done really well
Me too.
in that he's got such a good grasp on language. He was a polylinguist. I think it was something like a dozen languages he was able to speak. So I think that is what allowed him to write in a way that, even though it's completely new colloquial language, you can still follow along very easily. I think there was never really a stage.
Right, don't they?
Yeah, it's not just the actual words themselves feeling as if they're authentic, but the way they're put into the structure. I was thinking about Wobbajack, the Jabberwocky, where because of the structure around the fake words, you understand what's happening.
Yeah, but sometimes
it makes
it hides certain acts.
You like it kind of uses euphemism to lighten up some of what's going on. Yeah, that's also
the
true.
colloquial language hides to a big degree the acts that actually are going out. For example, the in and out for
Yeah.
There's
So-
this is one way to get past the censors, because the censors were actually quite active at this stage. In that it was first published in 1962, it's kind of an interesting question, right? Like what he's describing as so awful, it can only really get through by inventing this language to cloak it.
Yeah, on another point, a lot of people that are quote unquote involved in the underworld, they use if you have watched any documentaries on drug dealers, for example, they don't say, yeah, we sell drugs. They have some cute sounding nicknames for what they do. Best example being a stick up crew is basically a crew that robs drug dealers when they pick up their stuff. So you don't really describe what you're doing, you just cutify it in a certain way, and it not represent you don't really represent the harsh truths. You hide it in a cloud of language.
That's a really interesting comparison, and one that I didn't make. But it's also in the world of lingo for drug deals and things. It's also the speed in which the language has to adapt, because as soon as euphemism is figured out, they're very quick to change to a new one, so that they're always people listening in are always on their toes, because it may be that it was snow before, but now it's Charlie, and now it's just C, and now the amount of euphemism that they use, they will very quickly alternate so that they're not getting caught out. And you could picture this language doing the same thing, being quite quick to evolve.
Did you read anywhere in your research? Sorry, I was going to say, did you read anywhere in your research that said, why it was such a heavy reliance on like the Russian element, as in like Nadsat being Russian for teenager and or teenage and half, most of the words being Russian in origin? I
didn't find any outside of the book, but in the book, it's addressed as being, Slavic subversion, I think is a term that they use. So I don't know if it's him sort of hinting at the fact that there's cultural subversion going on from
he's gesturing it. It was the Cold War, right? So he's gesturing the Soviet Union.
That's what I kind of assumed.
I think he's indicating that maybe it's a sort of future world, that maybe in this world the Soviet Union is more powerful than it was at that time even.
Well,
it seems like
the socio-political overlay, it wouldn't surprise me if the Soviets had won to some degree or another in the Cold War.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because there's elements in which you would assume that, but you also have people, the pub being called, what is it? It's New York. It's
New York.
The Duke of New York. So there's a sort of Americana, and also the in the cinema when he's describing the films that are on, you've got cowboy films in which the heroic cowboys fighting against rustlers or whatever it is. So there's this sort of hint that there was maybe a joint victory, or maybe the Cold War's still going on, but the cultural influence is sort of taking over both influences are taking over countries, and it's sort of competing in the culture itself. I don't know. There's weird hints at things going on outside of the main story that are very clever but not directly addressed. So all you can do is make allusions to them.
He makes
it must be
men on the moon, even though it's 62. There's a lot of rockets, but no men on the moon at that time, right? And obviously it was the Russians who were most successful, I think, with the space program at that time, weren't they?
Yeah, and I don't, from memory, I don't remember it ever actually specifically saying it takes place in England, but I mean, it's kind of, to me, it's obvious, but I can't remember there being ever a specific moment when where it states that.
It seems like it is. There are a couple of, like, I think there's a reference to Victoria, and he doesn't know who that is really. It's like everything is forgotten.
He thinks it means victory.
Yeah, some victory, or
I mean, obviously the masks as well that they pick up would heavily hint that they're in England, but it is never actually directly addressed. So again, I think because of the language that's being used and the way it's being used and the kind of allusions to Cockney rhyming slang, it's very easy to assume where it's set. But again, it's never actually stated.
Yeah.
It's like the villages that they go to.
Exactly. The way he describes the villages is a very English way to describe it. It's never outright said.
With the language though, because it's obviously it's just a teenager kind of youth thing. Like there's no clue in the book that like the regular everyday people and the adults speak Nadsat, or even know particularly what it is, because obviously when he at the end, when he meets one of his old friends with his new woman, she's got no idea. So obviously it can't be. It must be fairly niche, in his world.
And she makes fun of him.
Yeah,
for speaking like that
because he sounds funny. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, these for whatever it is, 140 pages. There's a lot packed in that isn't ever more than glossed over, but it makes you think about the world. There's allusions to a much bigger world behind it, I think.
Yeah,
which is why it's such an effect. Yeah, it's why it's such a well-written book. Sorry, carry on, Justine.
Just it's the tip of the iceberg effect, right? That you get like sort of a hint of something, and there's something much bigger lies behind it.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's an excellent rough sketch of a world that's plausible. That it's at least it's not sufficiently obviously self-contradictory as to destroy verisimilitude.
Mm-hmm.
And Burgess does an excellent job of doing it in that way, so he doesn't address the central questions or concerns that would answer all of these details, because fundamentally none of that matters to the story, so he leaves it out intentionally.
Yeah, it's almost like Alex doesn't, he's only dimly aware of what lies beyond him, It's almost like he doesn't. In Martin Amos's book Money, there's the main character who refers to the Queen just because he sees her picture on the money a lot, and he'll just refer to her as the chick. And he has that's about all he knows, is the chick is on the money.
It's funny that you mention him, because when we come to the legacy, he was really influenced by Burgess.
Yes, absolutely. He has very similar types of depictions of criminals, lower class criminals in particular. But
right, so just to carry on with the Burgess trivia, we were just talking on the pre-show conversation about his sequel to 1984, which is really not well known, but one that we might have to take a look at, where he sort of addresses the issues that he has with Orwell's novel and rewrites it himself. And another notable thing, and one that if you want to go down as a dystopian writer, maybe you should time your death. He died exactly 30 years after Aldous Huxley, which was November 22nd. That date just seems to be written in history for people that write dystopian fiction. But this was the other one that I wanted to mention, just because I imagine he had immense pride after this. He was awarded the Male Chauvinist Pig of the Year award by the Feminist Press. So, good lad.
High
It
honor.
sounds like an achievement to me.
They're
Exactly.
very based.
Right. So that's Burgess. Let's actually go on to the legacy. Like I say, I've got Amos in the corner there. He was heavily influenced. Most people will know Clockwork Orange through the Stanley Kubrick film. But I've also got on here, there's quite a few either bands or songs that are named after elements that have come out of Clockwork Orange. Again, because it hints to this larger world, people have kind of pulled out things to reference to it. And in the bottom right here, there was actually a film by Andy Warhol made in 1965, which was based on Clockwork Orange, which I was completely unaware of. I want to get around to watching at some stage, because that just seems like again, it's one of those, we view artists in bubbles sometimes and don't necessarily view them as being contemporaneous, but that I'd never heard of. The bottom left, Tarantino spoke about Clockwork Orange and the juxtaposition of music. Obviously in Clockwork Orange it's classical music, but in that it was sort of pop music. The juxtaposition of that with violence, and it's become quite a common trope in films now, but this is one of the first times we see it, really. And Heath Ledger's performance was really inspired by Alex in both the novel and Malcolm McDowell's performance of it. And the final thing I've got on here, I don't know what it is, but it seems like every book we look at, there's been a manga made of it. So there was a Clockwork Apple written. There's a little manga here. I know nothing about it, but I just find it interesting that we always seem to cover things that have had another manga made of it. It seems like they're just as bereft of ideas as Hollywood is, because they're constantly just stealing novels from the 60s. But right.
Well, manga has been eating American comics lunch for a good long while now. The comic fan industry and Comicsgate, etc., is all a Twitter about how basically the top 10 selling comic books in America are actually imports from Japan. So,
well, they make good stuff, to be honest.
Yes, that's the point.
Yeah, I'm watching a lot of Ghibli films at the moment, and they're really, some of them are a little bit subversive, but they are really well made, and sometimes they leave you in the dark with not a clear message, so they leave you wondering and thinking and trying to solve it or fit it in a puzzle, but you don't, so you have to think it about. But they're really well made on this point. I can recommend Ghibli Studio.
I don't know my waifus from my weeaboos. I've got no idea what's going on with anime.
It's all Dutch to me.
It's all Japanese to me.
For my oak.
Let's go on to the book. So here he is, the infamous Alex boy.
Malcolm McDowell has some pretty significant films in the 60s, and so
yeah, pretty spectacular performance in the Stanley Kubrick film. And obviously we'll try and avoid talking about it, but it is going to come up. And I want to mention now the old adage that every still it could be a painting. Taking the images from the film, either sent over from iTunes or taking out myself, it really is true that in Stanley Kubrick's films, almost every shot is like perfectly aligned, that could just be put up on the wall.
Yeah, his compositions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, his use of color and lighting is just amazing. But back to the book. So Alex, who wants to start us off?
Well, he's a psychopath.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
classic psychopath. And he doesn't change throughout the book at all.
Yeah, it's
no. There's no big revelation, is there?
There is not really. Usually, when you have a first-person narrator who's talking about the past, you are aware of a kind of gap between their the person who's speaking and the person, the I that's depicted in the past, and the two then sort of come together. We don't really have that here. Like he doesn't, there's no kind of moral overlay to his narration.
Yeah, there's no regret, no remorse, no concern in any respect by the main character. It's just this is what happened, and this is the consequence of that. And hey, look, I'm free, and this is getting boring, so I'm going to find something else to do.
Yep.
A lot of it reminds me of when you meet a guy in a pub and he's just telling you about some kind of thing that happened the last time he was out, and some people got beaten up, or someone got a drink chucked over him. Just the way he tells it, it kind of not trivializes it, just kind of makes it like very matter of fact, like this happened, and it's kind of like a total value free kind of reciting of the thing that just happened, even though it was horrific. It's like, we did this and it was great, and now moving on.
He'll refer to the reader as oh, my brother, and be pally with the reader, which sort of, again, it makes you feel a little bit disgusted in the fact that you're becoming friends with this monster.
That's the thing. He doesn't have friends because he's a psychopath. So he's painting on his relationships the veneer of friendship and brotherhood, because he's recognized that society puts value on that. So but he doesn't value it, so he's just using the trappings of it to basically continue to enjoy the world and his life the way he wants to. And to your point, Quackhouse, about there not being any emotional investment, I don't that's not what I'm getting. I'm getting that there's a significant and powerful relation of the emotional context from the perspective of Alex, and solely from the perspective of Alex. Other people don't exist to Alex except in as much as they make him happy or make him sad or allow him to vent his frustrations. The world exists for the benefit of Alex.
Yeah, I mean, the emotional bits kind of come from when he's describing things that directly happened to him, as opposed to things that he did. Like when they're torturing him with the aversion therapy or whatever you want to call it, and or like when the cat's attacking him, he's like, and that cat bit me, dear reader, and it's latched onto your humble narrator and that kind of thing.
One of the most interesting scenes in the book tells us a lot, which is when he gets angry at his Droog Dim because the guy is rude. There's a woman singing, and Alex. One important thing about Alex to note is that he loves classical music, which is like adds a little layer of mystery to the character, right? And he loves classical music, and a woman is singing from a totally imaginary piece of music. By the way, I looked it up.
I did the same thing.
Yeah. And his friend Dim sort of makes rude noises, and then Alex attacks him. He says it's not that he hurt her; she was okay. He hurt me. Like it bothers him that Dim is disrespectful towards something he likes, the music. And then this kind of comes back to haunt him because the friends get pissed off at him. And
it's like with the disrespect thing. I've met a lot of people like that. They're kind of, well, not a lot, but a few that they're kind of obsessed with respect.
Yeah.
It's like a really big thing. Like, you disrespecting me. I know it kind of. It seems like a thing that's a lot in kind of like gangster rap kind of culture. Like respect is like,
Well, it's also something that we see
high on the agenda.
When it's more passive, then he is respected by them because he does listen to them. But it's only when he has to actively assert his dominance in the group that they start to reject it. When they're going out and robbing and doing a bit of the old in out, he will give orders and everyone will listen to him. But it's when he hits dim and asserts himself as the leader, directly, that people start to question him.
Mhm.
Just on the music, because I think it's a very important element of the story that we need to address. I think that a lot of it comes to Burgess questioning the idea of whether or not great art and sort of the civilizationing, the civilizing of the youth through art is whether or not it's good enough to change someone like Alex, because he has an appreciation for what would be considered high culture. Yeah, but obviously he's still capable of these acts.
Yeah, on this note, it totally mocks people that are convinced, oh yeah, we need to culture that as savages and they will become just like us, interested in the fine arts and not stealing and doing the in and out and stuff like that. But if you think about it, one of the most disgusting people on this world was a fan of Wagner. And Wagner makes some horrific or terrific pieces of classical music. So there you go.
I didn't know Tony Blair liked Wagner.
I mean the second, the first one.
There's no way Tony Blair likes classical music. No way.
Stalin did indeed like classical music. You're right. He once had asked for the recording they were playing, but it was live, so he had the whole orchestra played again. It's actually part of that movie, The Death of Stalin, which is quite funny.
Fantastic.
It was. I saw that the other week.
I think it could be linked to the fact that modernism kind of asserts that art can be a replacement for religion, right? Like you don't necessarily need religious education. Just if you study art and sort of have a grasp of the canon and so on, that's enough really to morally inform you. I think that could be part of what his
art qua art is a veneration of fundamentally anything. So when you're talking about great artists, the art that is the byproduct of their greatness could venerate fundamentally anything. There's beautiful, wonderful pieces of art that have been produced on subjects ranging from hell on one end to sexual degeneracy on the other to torture and mass slaughter on another hand. It's the translation into emotion and a creation that echoes and evokes that emotion in the observer. That's really the core of artwork.
What's the Mozart piece that's about excretion?
Oh, I don't know that.
Well, it sounds beautiful, but the actual yeah. What's the translation of it?
Lick me at my ass.
That's the one.
Yeah, and this is one of those things it's core to art, and there are so many degenerate artists who are revered as great throughout history. It boggles the mind, and then one at some point one starts to wonder if there's some sort of correlation between degeneracy and the ability to produce great art.
Well, I think it may be a temperament thing where I don't know, that artists have a certain disposition that leads them to not necessarily degeneracy, but a certain mindset that is more capable. It's sort of a rejection of the current establishment. It's kind of an individualistic thing, so they don't necessarily become degenerate, because you look at Burgess himself.
If you can harness their talent, I think it's a matter of harnessing their talent. Like if you think of the great art of the Renaissance is mostly bought and paid for by the church, right? And so they got some of the most amazing, talented people to paint the Sistine Chapel. Art.
It's channeled through something to attain something higher.
On this point, most of it wasn't really paid by the church. It was paid by the church through the money givers. For example, patrons, the Medici family in Italy was or I think Venice, to be specific, was a very giant patron of not Picasso, who was a degenerate as well.
Michael,
Yeah,
was it Michelangelo?
Michelangelo.
But
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, yeah.
it depicts
He was adopted by the family, wasn't he?
Might be. I don't know.
I think so. But yeah, I mean, talk about degeneracy in art. The Medici's are simultaneously, you know, responsible for some of the greatest pieces of Renaissance art ever made, and some of the most degenerate things ever made. So there does seem to be a correlation, but
no, when it comes to literature,
not
though,
causation.
we've read a few books where the author's just basically a cantankerous old git, not who you would describe as you know, your average artist.
Yes. Yeah,
That's an author thing.
Yeah, don't get too I would say don't get too attached to the autobiography of your favorite artists, or you know, don't sort of make it contingent, your enjoyment of their art contingent on them being an upstanding member of society or something. So you'll get disappointed.
Well, going back to what makes great art is the emotional resonance with the observer. So, and there are a lot of base motivations for emotional reactions. So there's a great breadth of opportunity there for the artist to exploit, to induce such an emotional reaction from their audience that wouldn't necessarily be present if they were to restrict themselves to things that are slightly less base in their nature.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a book that raises these questions very, like it raises them not just because Alex and you know, enjoys classical music, but because we have to contend with this tension between beautiful language and horrible violence. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it is a disturbing book. I come out on the side of it's a good book and a worth reading book, but I can understand why some people would feel torn.
Well, going back to the first point that Albion was making about the postscript in the British release versus the exclusion of that in the American publication and in the Kubrick film, that last chapter basically destroyed whatever value I thought there was in the book, because the main character didn't learn a damned thing.
What I got out of there's this passage that has to do with youth, right? Mm-hmm. And I think one of his says youth is like it might be an animal. No, one of these Malenki toys, you viddy, being sold in the streets, little Cheloveks made out of tin. Then you wind it up, right? The Clockwork Orange. So youth is. I think, for one thing, he's saying youth is somewhat psychopathic. Youth is not empathetic, and Burgess was writing at a time when it was the youth quake and everything was all about youth, and you were supposed to sit at the feet of youth and you know, soak up their innovations and learn from them, right? Like it was the 60s.
They're uncorrupted from society.
Yeah, and the old were like dismissed as that, you know, as out of date, and there was the generation gap and all this stuff people yapped about. And I think that's what he's driving home with this.
I would disagree with this point. I think it's more a question if somebody has free will, or if the human to that point is only a toy robot that you wind up, and it just, if you put the energy in it, will just go in its pre-directed path.
Oh yeah, that's.
Well, let's actually address the title of the book, because that is the essential. That is the question.
Yeah,
that is
on this was
the biggest question.
Yeah,
that's it. It's not. I'm not saying it's the only, you know, meaning of A Clockwork Orange, but I'm saying that the whole presentation of youth in the book youth is like a clockwork orange, right?
Yeah, and don't forget that Alex is very young. Just to throw that in there. Go ahead, Justine.
I think these things can be multifaceted. So there's definitely that is going on as well. The whole question of free will.
Yeah, I'll just tie those two things together before we carry on. So he's 15 in the book until the epilogue in which he's 18. So yeah, youth plays a big part of it. And just in reference to the title, there's two meanings behind it. The first one being an old phrase that apparently was quite common in reference to something that was bizarre, which was it being as queer as a Clockwork Orange. But the other, which is addressed directly in the book, is that the concept of a Clockwork Orange is something organic and something that's juicy and fleshy and pulpy and organic, being subject to a mechanical system. The system that it's referring to is a moral system, but it could also be whether or not we're just mechanized in the senses, as you say, whether or not it's a question of free will.
Isn't it sorry to interrupt, isn't it the title of the writing that I don't recall the name, where they rob him and kill his wife?
F. Alexander,
yeah, exactly. I have the quote up here: "The attempt to ooze juicy at the last round of bearded lips of God, to attempt to impose, I say, laws, condition, appropriate to a mechanical creation. Against this I raise my sword pen." I guess this is maybe the distillation of the book. It's about the question of free will or mechanical creation, and mechanical, as you said, Justine, just winding up the machine, and the energy will transfer the object to his predestinated destiny.
So yeah, can we blame? Part of it is, can we blame anybody for what they do if they're just predestined? But
I blame the parents.
we will come on to them. There's
the idea that toddlers are basically tyrants, and if you don't kind of socialize them by the time they're 5, it's very difficult to get rid of that tyrant behavior, which maybe
they're small enough that you can handle them, right? But they're little psychopaths essentially.
It's like little dogs. If you treat a little dog like a person without showing it where it is in the scheme of things in the pack, then it becomes the snappy and violent.
Caesar Milan all the way.
I just want to give my thoughts on the epilogue. That I agree that I think it does better without having it, but it has a completely different message not having it. What could be thought of with the epilogue, which I haven't really seen a great deal of people mentioning, is the fact that it is also possible that the conditioning he's gone through is what's led to him having this change of heart when he's older. So you could still see it as a very disturbing ending, in that even this change of heart that he thinks he's going through because he's aged could be because he's been mentally broken as a teenager.
Yeah.
It might be that the free will that he thinks he's gained and he's now changing his behavior, even that is up for debate, because it may be that it's still psychological conditioning that he's been exposed to.
Sure, it could be, but that it correlates much more with everything that has been described about the perspective of the character in the first part of the book than it does with anything resulting from the experiences through which he went in the second part of the book.
Because he doesn't really understand it himself, does it? At the end, he doesn't really understand why he started to think about these, having a baby and a woman in his life. He doesn't know why. It kind of creeps up on him, doesn't it? It's not something that, it's not like a sudden revelation. It's just like he starts having these visions and dreams, and and all of a sudden he's carrying a picture of a baby about in his wallet, and he doesn't really understand it.
I think it goes back to he got bored. because that comports with the rest of the character that I've seen.
Yeah, well, that as well, yeah. But
Let's hope he doesn't get bored with his family too fast.
Well, yeah, that's.
I
that's the issue.
expect that's likely to happen. That's kind of the point that I'm making, is that there's no growth, there's no understanding or comprehension that it intrudes on the solipsism of the main character.
So what you're saying is Alex is the perfect example for why you should have the death penalty.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's
Thank you very much. Good night.
That's all. That's all, folks. Yeah.
I've been watching a lot of this criminal profiler called Pat Brown, and she sort of mocks the idea where a lot of people will try to say, why does the psychopath do this? Why did he do that? Did he do this because he felt shame? Did he do that? She says, oh, he does it because he likes it. End of story. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's what he says too. I do these things because I like to.
Yes, and
Because
that's
it's not constrained to don't do them.
And now that I've stopped enjoying them, I'm going to stop doing them and look for something else I'll enjoy.
yeah.
I think he says he's bored with doing it. He let the others beat the old man up or something. He just say he's bored with it. So
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
it's a very menacing passage, and it's really there is something really effective about it, I think, in that he essentially says people do good because they feel good doing good, and I wouldn't stop them from doing that. That's absolutely fine. They can carry on feeling good about themselves by doing good. But what makes me feel good is doing what I do. It's kind of it's the self-interested, like Dawkins' view of morality, where it's all about self-interest, which strips away morality. It's a moral system which has no morality in it. It's all about self-interest, and it's a really I don't know. There's something quite haunting about that to me.
yeah.
I thought it was really
tantamount to
effective.
virtue signaling.
Yeah, and on this point, you don't start robbing and doing the in and out and murdering if there isn't a progression. You don't just go in with a gun, except you have to, and start robbing people or kicking the shit out of people. You have to start small, even as a criminal, or smallish. That's even with the most serial murder. They started to torturing pets in the neighborhood, and at one point that isn't enough, so they start torturing their family members, and at one point that isn't enough as well, and they started torturing the
Strangers.
strangers. And on this point, there's a huge explosion of quote-unquote serial killers after the 60s as well, or at least when they were documented.
Yeah, the 70s.
Not to answer for.
70s and 80s were massive serial killers in America.
Crime in
Which,
general,
if you think about it, these were they were a lot of them were in their 20s. Yeah, a lot of them were in their 20s and 30s.
Well, they were the children of the flower children.
Yeah.
Me generation.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was that, Justine?
Oh, the me generation.
Yeah.
Okay.
People talked about that. And there's a book by, I think it's Christopher Lasch, The Culture of Narcissism. It's quite a good one. Talks about that.
Ned Flanders' generation.
Well, if you just say, stupid things like do what makes you feel good, this kind of thing. Well, there's a kind of cold logic in that for people who enjoy violence, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it goes back to the comment I made about art. There's a whole hell of a lot of things from which humans derive emotional response, and precious few of those are actually socially or individually beneficial.
Sorry, about what was that word? Prior to what's not socially beneficial?
Humans have emotional responses to a broad swathe of experiences, only very few of which are actually beneficial to the individual or the society in general. So it's very emotionally fulfilling to enact one's will upon the world, just flat out, period. That's why babies constantly drop things, because they made that happen. They dropped that. They were the cause of that action, and they're realizing what they can do in the context of the world. And unless strong borders are established, that consequences are enforced, they will continue to push the limits of their ability to affect the world, and heaven protect anyone who gets in their way, because they won't. And that leaves an awful broad swathe of emotional experiences available to the individual, who is unlimited by constraints of conscience.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why these gentle parenting groups are a bad idea.
What would Stefan Molyneux say, though?
Well, I think the core of Molyneux's perspective on peaceful parenting is children need to be made aware of the consequences of their actions. So they need to understand what those consequences are. And his approach to making them aware of those consequences is not to smack them, but to restrict their freedom in some other fashion.
Yeah.
Which, to my mind, is a distinction without a difference.
Mm-hmm. It's punishment without calling it punishment.
Exactly.
Okay, so moving on from Alex, his three droogs, his lackeys, at the beginning of the novel, we have Pete, Georgie, and Dim. I jotted down, they're described as having different styles of cup on their nether regions, and 4 different masks. Now, I've got them here, and I don't really know if they're meant to symbolize anything, but I would have thought that their inclusion meant something. So Dim has a clown face on his cup, and Percy Shelley as the mask. So I don't know what he's trying to tell us on that. Obviously, he is the clown of the group, which may be a little bit too on the nose. But the Percy Shelley thing, I'm curious what people think. Is there any kind of hidden symbolism going on with these masks, or do you think he just pulled them out of a hat?
It was the only mask that I couldn't quite believe there was a mask of. Like, who knows?
Yeah, it was a bit bizarre. Because we also had with Pete, we had him having a hand on his cup and Elvis for the mask. Georgie had Henry VIII as a mask and a flower on his cup. And Alex himself had Benjamin Disraeli and a spider on his cup. So it's all that I can't picture it being random, but I spent a while looking at this and not really being able to piece together what could be going on. So I don't know if the group have any ideas.
Well, the crotch accessories are much easier for a non-British person to understand, because I don't know who any of those people are aside from Elvis.
I just know who Disraeli is.
Come on now.
Well, and Henry the whatever, but the only thing about Henry is he was a king at some point.
He looks a lot like a Scottish comedian.
Disraeli was a prime minister in the 19th century, a Jewish prime minister.
Okay, does his being Jewish
poet.
matter?
He was the only Jewish prime minister, I think.
Yeah, to my knowledge, anyway.
David Starkey likes to talk about him a lot.
I don't think that was why he was included in the novel. Yes. So my criticism that I have, and I know it's sort of left out because it wasn't viewed as being necessary, but I do feel like Dim you see as a distinct personality. For me, I found it hard to differentiate between Pete and Georgie for a little bit.
Yeah.
They do have distinct personalities. Georgie is much more abrasive, whereas Pete is very wet. He doesn't want to challenge authority. But I don't know whether it be through description or what. When we re-encounter Pete, I had to sort of remember who it was at the beginning.
Is he the
It's,
one?
it's a
who
minor
gets
criticism,
married
but
at the end?
he's the one who's married in the epilogue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that goes back to their whole, expression of their personality. Pete was the go along, get along kind of guy, so he naturally fell into the social expectation of having a wife and kids.
Mhm.
Georgie couldn't get past being what he was, so he eventually got killed. And Dim went into what was natural for Dim, being muscle.
An enforcer.
And now he was legal muscle.
Government grunt.
Yeah.
Yes, I don't know if there's anything that you want to really cover with it. We've covered a lot in our chats whilst we're on the Alex slide. So if there's anything in particular you want to cover with them individually, if not, I've got his parents up next. If we want to move on to that. Oh no, sorry, not his parents. F. Alexander.
There's only really Dim that does anything.
Mhm.
Pretty much.
One noticeable difference from the film again is after the therapy, he encounters Dim and Billy Boy in the book, whereas in the film, I think it's Dim and Pete, or Dim and Georgie. There's one or the other. Okay, let's go on to.
Well, to go back onto the point, and this is something that basically Burgess does to reflect what would have happened to Alex were he not what happened to him, or had that not happened to him.
Mhm.
So had he not been betrayed by Georgie, which in the book is very clear that he gets betrayed by Georgie, that this is all a setup for Georgie to get to screw him over and basically take charge of the Droogies.
Mhm.
But if he succeeds, he's going to be Georgie, and then he's going to have been killed at this point through the natural course of things. So I think that's something that's basically laid out by Burgess through these other three characters as to the way and the course and the natural consequence and results of this type of a life.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And just on that point, he has a dream about Georgie being a military trainer, which I think again is kind of hinting that if he hadn't died, he would have ended up as a goon for the state as well, because it seems like all of them would have, if not having been killed or gone through the conversion therapy.
Well, he becomes one in the end. He works for the archive, if I recall correctly.
Yeah,
like that.
Yeah, he becomes a state employee as well. So.
Yeah, so he got consumed by the state, and with that money, he can pay his new druggies to do horrendous stuff and throw around in the pub.
Yeah, there's this sort of again the idea of anarcho tyranny. It's kind of referenced early on in the book that there's a mutual agreement that the police have control of the daytime, but at nighttime it's free reign. So that it doesn't matter which way you turn, you're being violated by one group or the other.
It feels like the city is one vast council estate,
Yeah, that's a perfect way of describing
tower
it.
blocks, full of tower blocks.
Yeah.
Isn't that the case of all cities?
But they're like the projects.
Yeah, that's why I don't live in one.
That's why the intelligent people move to the suburbs or the countryside.
They just end up ruining it by turning it into another city.
Well, that's because they don't know how to raise their children.
Or don't have children.
So F. Alexander is kind of like a Burgess figure in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
He's a writer. I was quite struck with the way it's called, a place called home, and that he violates like this place, which is obviously a good place, a source of a refuge and a comforting place, loving place.
And when he first encounters home, just again to keep the audience up with it, when he first encounters home and they break in and they rob them and they perform the in and out on his wife and they beat him. yeah, his referencing to home is very snide and demeaning to the term. After he's been through his therapy, and he later gets beaten up by Dim and Billy Boy, he encounters home and goes to it. Sort of naturally views it as a light in the darkness, where he sees the word home and is attracted to it. So it's a sort of his changing views on home, whether or not be through the therapy or because he's growing up, who knows? But he has very different reaction to it the two times he encounters that word.
Yeah,
because it's not actually, because that word is never used in reference to his actual house. It's just that he lives with his P&M. So the times we see the word home only in reference to this place.
Well, it's an echo of the two facets of it. That home is a refuge, but it's also a repository. So if you can crack someone's home, you get access to everything they've stored throughout their life. So as a result of that, it's a very tempting target for a psychopath. Conversely, if the psychopath is in need of aid, it's a very excellent boon to find a home where one can rest and recuperate. So utilitarian, so viewed through a utilitarian lens, which is the only lens a psychopath knows, it's a loot box, as it were, or it's a campfire. It's a save point.
Yeah, and then at the beginning, he's just it's like just a place to wreck.
Mm-hmm. So, but in both cases, he uses it for his personal benefit, and it's viewed through that personally beneficial lens.
Yeah, there's no idea that it's where home is where the heart is or anything. It's just
There's no empathy at all in the main character, none.
And even when F. Alexander is trying to use, I mean, you could make the same criticism against F. Alexander, I suppose, but when he's telling Alex how they will use him as an icon, as sort of a semi-martyr against the state, the only question that comes out of Alex's mouth is what's in it for me? What am I going to get out of this? So there is no. The only change that we see in him is because of the conditioning he's gone through, not because he's changed, and that is the core of the question. Is he moral because he can't do immoral acts, or is he moral because he chooses not to? And that is the crux of the question.
I'd have to say that it was asked better in the Bible.
Well, if we're going to compare, that might be a high bar to set if we're talking about questions of morality.
Well, I mean, that's the same question that was presented before the angels and man. That's the ultimate reflection of free will versus determinism, and it's an age-old question of philosophy.
Indeed, yeah.
Well, I apologize that a couple of 100-page novel from the 60s does not answer philosophical questions as well as the Bible.
But Burgess does raise. Burgess was a religious man, and he raises these questions. And I think he wants to explore the idea that the state, when you're living under a state, the best they can do, apparently, to deal with criminals is to remove their free will, as opposed to actually prevent them or police them or properly punish them. And this is the state itself is immoral.
Yeah, and on this point, F. Alexander writes in favor of free will and is an advocate for it, but he gets violated in procedure by somebody doing his free will. By Alex, he violates him, F. Alexander, his wife, and his home because he can choose to do so. And after he is quote unquote fixed, he cannot because he's feels physically ill to doing bad, so he cannot do it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, him being fixed is a bit like an animal getting fixed, isn't it? It's like
yeah, it's getting spayed.
Yeah.
Morally spayed. Right, so let's move on to the parent question. So, how does Burgess address parents in this novel?
They are weak.
Subservient to the children.
Yeah.
Which, again, looking at when it was made, he is, I think, pretty insightful. It's 62, so a lot of the movements we associate with the 60s haven't actually set off yet. So he's sort of predicting both the 60s culture and the 70s response to the culture before it's even really set off, I think.
Yeah.
Quick question: are they really his parents? Because at one point this gets pulled into doubt because his social counselor or something says he's got placed by good parents. Are they really his parents, or are they foster parents?
I don't recall that. I'd need to double check that. I thought that they were their parents, but I may be wrong.
Irrespective of whether they're his genetic parents or his, functional parents, they still have the responsibility to raise and inculcate proper societally beneficial values in their child. So what we see is weak parents beget amoral children.
Mm-hmm. And it's not just that they're weak with Alex. Again, when he comes back from his therapy and he finds that Joe has moved in, Joe is just as easy to put them under his thumb as Alex was. It's not that they've really replaced their son with a better son. It's just that he's kinder to them that he says, but he's using them just as much as Alex was.
I think they're parents just for being parents' sake. Something to that line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if there's any characters in the book with less agency, I can't think of them off the top of my head.
They seem completely cowed.
They're totally broken in pretty much every respect. And even when he comes home and meets Joe and they have the little bit of a dust up, neither of the parents get involved beyond trying to calm it down, but ineffectually calming it down. They have no functional actual ability to calm anything.
It's because they don't want to take responsibility, and I think that's what he's hinting at.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the degradation of society has occurred because this is what you're dealing with: parents that don't actually want to take responsibility for anything.
Well, and to circle back around to the Clockwork Orange and the free will question, these are people who are actively avoiding having any free will. They're actively avoiding any responsibility or making any decisions.
Yeah, they're as little orange in them as possible.
Yeah, P just has his drone job, and I don't know what his mother's supposed to do. I can't remember now. But
they both do some kind of menial labor that they're not interested in. But
because he even gives the money, doesn't he? Just out of the kindness of his heart, and they're quite groveling at it. You know what I mean? Like, oh, thank you, son. It's very, it's not a very parent kind of relationship. It's very, it's weird. Strikes me.
Well, the problem is that it's not weird. The problem it's not weird now. This is not an uncommon situation in certain communities. That's
a problem.
Yeah, and that's why you've got such shambolic living conditions in the book. I think it's one of the main reasons.
I mean, they'd probably still consider it quite good at. I mean, he's got 2 parents, both still married, both have jobs. He's still at school. He goes to school. He's presumably going to finish school, or he would have done if. He's living.
And that's what his counselor is telling him. On paper, this looks like it's a good match, a good house, good home life, because his parents both have solid jobs. They're making solid money. They're still married. They have their own place. They're not living with a bunch of other people. But there's no there. It's just a Clockwork Orange. There's just
exactly.
He's not like your typical delinquent that we get a lot of excuses for a little later on, like coming from a broken home, maybe being beaten as a child, all these kind of things you hear, as excuse. He doesn't have that, but you're right that he apparently doesn't have any guidance.
Maybe Alex should have been beaten.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I wonder if maybe
I don't think there's any maybe about it.
I wonder if maybe Burgess had included this as a way of removing that as an excuse for his actions. The sort of the psychoanalytics that was coming out. You can't use that as a defense for Alex. Take him on his actions because he comes from what would seemingly be an ideal household. So let's not use the whole troubled childhood as an excuse, and let's address the actual issues that. I think that was intentional.
Yeah, I think that goes back to I do what I do because I like to.
Yeah, because he's very functional as well, isn't he? He can do things. It's not like he's
intelligent.
Useless. Yeah,
right. Yeah, he's got a high IQ. He's got general competence in everything. He's an attractive looking young man.
Yeah,
and it's not like he's some, he's not some kind of sulky emo, telling his parents he hates them or anything. He's just,
No, he's domineering.
And he just lies to them so he can get on with what he wants to get on with. He tells them the basic lies. So there is a hint that he's had trouble before, right?
Yeah, he's had to be sent away to some sort of schooling. I kind of got the kind of idea of a military training thing that they might send troubled youth to or something like that. But it's the worst type of lie that he says as well, because it's a lie that both he knows and his father knows is not true, but he just won't address it because he's not man enough to do so. His father knows that he's a delinquent and he's got this money through ill-gotten means, but both of them will live easier if they just carry on pretending that he's working a night shift.
Again, it's a failure to assert free will, failure to assert any kind of a will.
In Canada, when I was a teenager, some of my naughtier friends used to get sent on Outward Bound. People know what that is. It's like you go and do survival in the forest for a month or two. And at the end, they stick you on an island with basically nothing. That's a good technique.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah. The delinquents.
I'll go for that. Sounds like Lord of the Flies.
Yeah, it's Lord of the Flies. Yeah, basically.
It sounds like what they do in one of the Scandinavian countries. I forget which one. Where they put the criminals on an island in the middle of nowhere, where they live in like a commune or something.
I'm not sure you want to see a commune led by Alex. No,
but they do, don't they? I can't remember which Scandinavian country it is, but some of the, they have like these islands for criminals, where they kind of live on the land and try and rehabilitate them that way rather than putting them in a, big prison.
And we did see a commune led by Alex. He was called Jack, though. Lord of the Flies. At least I thought he was Jack.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
it just took too long to click. Yeah, no, yeah, you're right. He was ginger though, so it was a little bit different. Let's carry on.
He had an excuse.
You're gonna trouble childhood. Right. following along with the plot, after invading the house, invading home, the next assault they go to is the cat lady here, and it's after this intrusion and robbery, attempted robbery anyway, in which he accidentally kills her, that leads to him being arrested and going through the program that he goes through. So I don't really have a great deal to say about her, but it's kind of a good this is how he caps off the first section, because it's very segmented off. There's 3 acts, each with 7 chapters, and this is how he caps off the first.
A bit like in The Simpsons, right? The cat lady uses like cats as weapons.
Yes, yeah, it's quite a. This is where some of the black comedy comes out, because as he's describing it, he kind of says, "Oh, if you had been there, I'm sure it would have been hilarious." Even though it's this horrific scene where he's broken in and he's assaulting her, he's describing it as, "Oh, if you'd been witnessing it, it would have been hilarious. I had cats attacking me and everything."
Yeah, the most amusing part of that for me was the fact that they sold off all of his stuff to give to her cats.
Yes, I quite like that.
I was just like, that's the perfect capstone of the absurdity of the legal system under which he was working.
The perfect catstone.
Yeah.
Right, let's. Have we still got Freelance with us?
Yeah, I am still here.
Why did they give this lady all these sort of slightly porny paintings on the wall?
It was the 1970s.
It was Stanley Kubrick. Yeah.
In the book, she comes across more as a tough old bird, like.
Yeah.
She comes across as a crazy cat lady.
Yeah, like with a bit more sort of, she kind of tells him to go away and this kind of
Joie de vivre.
Yeah, she's a bit of something. There's a lot of cats.
What does he kill her with in the book? I can't remember now.
I think he just knocked her down and she fell.
Bottle,
he knocked her down and she fell badly or something.
Yeah, he doesn't hit her over the head with a giant penis like the film. No, I can't.
Is it the bust of Mozart? Does he use that? I can't quite remember. It's present,
something like
but
that.
I can't remember if he uses
I don't remember.
Yeah, that rings a bell. There's a lot of milk.
Ding.
A lot of milk and a lot of eyes in this story.
Yeah.
Lazzies.
Yeah, we haven't mentioned the milk.
Morocco.
The again, it kind of goes to some of the state's incompetence that they were perfectly fine to serve milk with alcohol in it because they don't have a liquor license. They can't serve alcohol. Again, it's one of those little petty things that they do to get around it, like we've seen during lockdown.
It's like spiked milk, isn't it, with like acid and God knows what.
Yeah, there's like hallucinogenics in it. Yeah.
Well, it goes back to the whole perversion of the natural state of things. The milk is the milk of life.
Yeah.
Pretty much every mammal is brought up with milk. Milk is essential. Yet, you put acid in it and it becomes perverted.
Yeah. It's a perversion of youth. I think that's.
Aesthetically, though, like the idea it's like this kind of cool hip milk bar where they put like random stuff in stuff in it, and that's gets everybody lively.
60s and 70s.
Do you not remember the Got Milk campaign?
Time to be alive.
That's not far off it with all of those bloody milk mustaches, those posters from the early 2000s.
I don't remember that.
I'll get an image up, but we'll move on to onto the best character in the film and maybe the book. Which, looking through again, there's some weird. I got reminded of Catch-22 with some of the names that he uses. Like PR Deltoid is just a very, what kind of surname? What is he alluding to? It's just bizarre. Certain names just very odd. and the prison chaplain. I put them both here because they're both in some ways more of a father figure than his father is. Even though Deltoid in the end doesn't really help him much, he does in some ways attempt to. And I think that the prison chaplain, although F. Alexander might be an insert of Burgess in some ways, the chaplain is his insert for discussing the moral questions of the book.
Yeah, the chaplain was, to my mind, probably the best character in the book. I can't. There's no other character that comes to mind that even approaches his level of depth of character and understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Is PR Deltoid his caseworker? I forget.
Yes, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
He sees what's going to happen. He's just powerless to stop it, and he keeps trying to tell Alex, "If you keep doing this, this is what's going to happen." He's like, "You proved me right, kid. I told you." That's why you see that smug smile.
Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, there's being proven right, and then there's spitting on his face, which is just such a vile. I something else again that kind of related to his love of music is he's a bit of a germaphobe. He never wants anyone in the gang to look like they've been in a fight. So the spitting on him is kind of a real kick in the
Insult.
teeth to Alex as a character. I mean, it is to anyone, but in particular Alex with his attitude.
He's a bit of a germaphobe, and he's a bit of a almost like a neat freak. Like he can't stand people being scruffy and dirty, and
again,
there's a lot of references to it.
He's a psychopath, so appearance is essential to a psychopath, because if they appear out of sorts, then their quarry will identify them and possibly run away. So they have to camouflage.
That makes sense.
Yeah. No, you're right on that.
It's like if you see someone with a big, bit of something on the face.
It's like American Psycho. Sort of
that came to my mind.
The ritual of going through to make sure the outward appearance is perfect, even though there's no soul.
Dexter.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which
the bit in American Psycho when he's got something on his face, and you can't, you can't stand it being there, Just kind of reminded me of that.
We'll get round to that at one stage, but I don't want to put too much of that kind of material on, because Brandig will end up mutinying.
I'll lead the mutiny, but I won't be the only one mutinying.
Okay, let's go on to the doctors. So, when reading the process that he goes through to have an adverse effect to violent behavior, I kept on thinking about the quote that I heard being used against Tony Blair, which is that when you think that you're doing something wrong to someone, you will stop. Like the prison officers beating him up, they'll rough him up and then they stop because they know that they're not helping him. With the doctors, when you think that you're doing something in someone's best interests, you can end up in hell pretty quickly, thinking that you're doing the right for someone.
Even when they realise, it's giving him also, as well as giving him an aversion to kind of violence and that kind of thing, it's also giving him this pain when he hears music, because it stirs up the same kind of feelings in him. They see that as like an interesting side effect, and then it's brought up, isn't it? That could just be his punishment.
Yeah.
He can't listen to music anymore as part of his punishment.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's mentioned in the book that if it's just violence, then the same emotional response is to music and to sex as is to violence, which is sort of true, but I don't know, that could be questionable as to whether or not I mean, the whole
Wasn't
thing
it
is
when-
questionable about how effective that would actually be, but yeah, sorry, carry on.
I was going to say, don't they say that when you see a small, a really cute puppy, it triggers the same parts of your brain as like violence?
I don't know. I all of this section, to me, I don't look at. I
could
try
just
not
crush it.
It's all
I try not to
serotonin and endorphins and brain chemistry.
Yeah, I wasn't reading it to look at the realism because I just don't know. I don't think that parts of it would be practical, but that's not the purpose of the book. You're not meant to be assessing it from an analytical standpoint of how realistic the process is. It's I think that kind of loses the essence of the book.
Yeah, but to your point about the motivations behind the action, I'm reminded of the C.S. Lewis quote about tyrannies. Of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive.
Yeah.
And when we look at the doctors behind this whole process, we see the ultimate utilitarian calculation where they approach the problem of violence in youth as a problem to be solved, and consequences to the solution be damned, whether the solution is worse than the disease. We've solved the disease, but we've created 5 other diseases, and I'm not going to talk specifically about secondary effects of current geopolitical situations, but they are readily apparent.
Where are you going, Brandon?
I do think, I think that quote from C.S. Lewis really describes the progressive mindset and the kind of things we see coming out of progressives, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. And it's been that case since the scientific revolution, as it were, to governance. They tried to bring the scientific and the industrial revolution into the idea of governance without understanding the metaphysical and philosophical underpinnings of what actually is justice.
Sorry, carry on.
No, I was just going to say, because justice incorporates retributive as well as restorative components.
Yeah, what's the Gottfried term? Is it the therapeutic state? That I think perfectly summed it up. Yeah,
it's a precautionary principle all over again.
But what they're trying to do is they're trying to kind of capture and then break the horses after they've left the stable door unlocked and like wedged it open.
Yeah.
As opposed to setting up things to succeed rather than setting it up to fail and then trying to stop it from failing once it's already gone.
Yes, but just in reading The Vision of the Anointed currently, how intentional is that though? Because looking at it as a state point of view, if you set up the system to fail, you have the state involved. And when you make it fail and you need to then put in solutions to that, the state is also the ones responsible for the solutions. So it's a way of, it's the whole crisis in Leviathan concept where, if you can manufacture systems that will fail, you can then have the public, you can be seen to be working in good faith to restore the problems that you're causing. And you can just have department after department working on issues that you yourself are actually implementing.
The bureaucracy is expanding to support the expanding bureaucracy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and then while I'm certain there's someone who has that vision, that level of comprehension, and that appreciation of scope, I would argue that most people within the government apparatus are like Dr. Branham and Dr. Brodsky, who are approaching the process and the problem scientifically and with a tight focus. I mean, you can. This goes back to Kubrick's filming and his shot placement, but the expression on these two's faces is just absolutely perfect and exemplary as to their approach, their dispassion, and their complete and total amoral observation of the situation as to whether it's solving the problem or not. Damn the consequences and the externalities of the solution to the problem. But but taking that back to government, that's what most of these programs do. They solve the problem directly in front of them. And by so doing, they create other problems. And they also incentivize the expansion of the problem across the broader society, because now everyone within the society knows that if they have that problem, it will be solved by the government. So they don't particularly take any steps of their own to preemptively solve that problem or avoid that problem. So on the margins, things get worse. And
yes, just on your comment on their expressions, when you go to Alex and you see him taking pleasure in violence, you feel disgusted, but you at least there is a connection there. You understand it on a visceral level. With this, there's something particularly evil about the cold reasoning logic behind subjugating someone to such horrors.
You can very easily see that same expression mirrored in prison guards and in people who are doing distasteful things because that's part of their job.
Yeah,
that's
following orders.
Well, yes, and that is the expression of someone who is actively, intentionally adopting a mask of emotional indifference.
Mm-hmm.
When did behaviorism really take off? I'm thinking Pavlov. It must have been.
There was Was that 50s?
Yeah, maybe 40s and 50s.
Pavlov was early 20th century.
Was it?
Yeah, because you have classic conditioning and then you have operant conditioning, which comes which is around 1920.
Just seems to be informed.
Might have become more popular. The research was done back then. It might have become popular later on. Usually takes a while for it to seep out of academia.
Well, you can see that same level of understanding, psychological understanding, in the conditioning that Hitler used for his SS. And then it was carried over to Stalin and his special police.
And then it was carried over to the American
CIA
ad man who made commercials.
Well, I think it was carried over by him first. He was writing in the 20s, wasn't he? Anyway, let's not go down that road. What's the next slide? These two have no relationship to each other, but I just wanted to stick them on the same because Billy did not need his own slide. Yes. I have to say I love Billy's outfit. It's very Warriors.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Warriors.
It's absolutely ridiculous, and it fits the character.
I have no further comment on either of these, really.
Well, since I saw the movie.
Well, Billy Boy's outfit is the character is basically Alex turned up to 11, and it's the only kind of a character that you're going to get in a consistent rivalry between two individuals. One who's actually competent and good at what he does, and one who aspires to be competent and good. And the one who aspires to be competent and good at it is Billy, obviously, because he's.
I've only just looked.
Speaking of the SS.
Yeah, let's. What's the next slide? I didn't notice that when I was putting that on.
Start telling my SS stories now.
Yeah,
that's not an SS uniform. That looks.
That's not any kind of a uniform.
Yeah, of course, but I mean his hat.
I don't remember the frilly shirts.
Yeah. I don't want to be a pirate.
The cravats and SS look.
Yes, it's in fashion this season.
It may well be. We laugh about some of the outfits they're wearing, but it's not far off. I could see someone walking down a walkway wearing that and not really be surprised. Oh well, sans the decorative
Headgear.
Yes, but
Is that an assault stiletto or a regular stiletto?
But they'll wear their communist T-shirt or whatever. They'll wear their like.
Yeah, if it had a little Che Guevara on it, it would be fine.
Yeah, then their hammer and sickle red T-shirt and stuff.
And to move off of Billy for a second, the minister is your classic minister. He's a complete and total creature of politics.
In fact, this looks like it could be a shot from Yes Minister.
Yeah.
Yeah, completely and totally finger in the air. Which way is the wind blowing? Am I your friend or am I your enemy today? And what did you do for me lately? And what are the polls telling me?
There's the tug of war, isn't there, as well, between the the current government and the wannabe government, from the the guy from the guy who lives at home. He lives at the home.
F. Alexander and the other co-conspirators.
Yeah, and they're all. It's like a tug of war. Who can get the most mileage out of Alex's situation? And Alex falls for it.
Well, he doesn't fall for it. He goes into it willingly because
that's what I mean. Though he thinks they're on his side, where he doesn't realize he's just being used.
Well, there is a question in the film. It's very blatant that the music is played intentionally. In the book, it's left a little bit more open as to whether or not the music is being played to make him jump out the window.
Oh, I don't know. I think they were hoping he.
I
didn't.
I definitely got that from the book. Yes, it was definitely deliberate. It was the goal was to create a martyr, and Alex understands that and acts as psychopath is wont to do. He has now put 2 people on the top of his enemies list.
I mean, at that stage, can you blame him?
Again, what was it? iTunes, the first part. Alex is a perfect example of ... of why the death penalty exists.
Yeah, of course. But on the other point, he makes out just like a bandit by playing both of them against each other, and I guess both of the minister and F. Alexander make out in the end, and Alex as well.
Mm-hmm.
He plays them off against each other, and he profits just like walking into the bank and saying, "Yes, that entire inside of the vault, please." And he walks out, and everything is in shambles.
Yeah, it ends on a bit of a realpolitik. There is no the ending is very much just everyone cleaning their hands and putting responsibility onto F. Alexander, who's already been through horrors by Alex. It's it's so ridiculous at that stage that it kind of does go into the black comedy, which I kind of love.
Yeah, because also when he realizes who Alex is, and he goes a bit insane, Alexander.
And that's politics. That's what good politicians do. That's why psychopaths have a tendency to rise to top tiers of politics, because politics reinforces and rewards psychopathic behavior.
Mm. And there's nothing that can keep you accountable except other psychopaths in other departments.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if they do a sequel, Alex could become a politician.
He could be the prime minister. You laugh, but he's.
I was going to say, don't joke.
No, I'm not joking.
He's actually got a perfect platform on which to run.
If we get a politician called Alexander,
Well, he grew up in the projects. He was he was famous because he was the only person who was ever run through this program. So everybody knows his name. So he's got great name recognition. He's turned his life around, and he now has got a 20-year career working for the state as a apparatchik. And he's got a wife and he's got 2 kids, just like everybody else expects.
Yeah.
He could become mayor of London, if not prime minister.
I was going to say, he didn't explicitly say that he wasn't born in New York.
Yeah, he's somewhat decent looking. He's pretty much intelligent. He's a psychopath, so he has no limits. So yeah, why not? Clockwork Orange 2, Alex as
Electric Boogaloo.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just.
Has anyone seen If?
I mean,
seen what?
The movie If, it's also got Malcolm McDowell in it, and it's from about 5, I don't know, not that much later, probably 4 years later.
No, I haven't seen it.
Public school boy, and things get pretty wild. He had a whole career of sort of. There's another one too called A Lucky Man, and then of course Caligula. A little overstated, like it was a little too on the nose, maybe. But this film definitely he made him into a genre, you know.
Mm-hmm. Oh, the performance was excellent. I mean, it's a Kubrick film, so
yeah, that's a given.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what were you going to say, sir?
Nothing.
So, just going on to the critical response. The book was divisive, but in looking at it, I was surprised at the level of controversy that people would associate with it. It was purely down to the Kubrick film. You know, people would love or hate it, but this level of, you know, banning the literature, that wasn't happening. It was the film that caused the controversy, and it just kind of got shifted onto the book as a byproduct of the film. When I was looking through it, like I say, there's really, really divided opinion at the time, but it was picked up a hell of a lot more in America than it was in Britain, which might tell you something about the cultural difference at the time, I suppose.
It's an average day in London, isn't it?
Well, it is now. Maybe not in 62.
Yeah, the book
Really has some predictive power, doesn't it?
Yeah, the book on itself is kind of harmless at first glance, but the book is really out and the movie doesn't have to deal with the hiding behind the nice words, so you really see the violence.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess this is what triggered a lot of response from people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it kind of. They also reminded me of the setup for Starship Troopers as well, with the you know with the youth running riot.
yeah, I can see that.
So someone who was a big fan, Roald Dahl, really liked this book. But I just wanted to go.
That doesn't surprise me, given what I know about his.
Exactly.
Another cantankerous old dude, yeah.
Certainly a more interesting character than one would assume from someone that wrote, you know, like Matilda. Like, oh yeah, he's a complex individual, Roald Dahl.
Yes.
But what I wanted to mainly focus on was Anthony Burgess responding to his own book. He was very torn between how to feel about the popularity of Clockwork Orange. I mean, as happens with many authors, he didn't feel that this was his best book that became popularized, but he at various times wished he'd never written it because he felt that it was too easily confused for being a glorification of violence.
Because it is.
Well, you know, I don't think it is, and I think, but the fact that he himself is saying that it may have been written in a way that could be easily confused. You know, he's addressing that.
I don't read it and think, oh, I think I'll go out and be violent. It doesn't make it seem like a very good thing to do. You know what I mean?
You don't want to commit some ultra violence after reading this.
No, it's like years of playing Grand Theft Auto hasn't made me want to go out and kill a hooker either.
No, it wasn't that made you want to do it.
That detail disturbs me every time someone mentions it. She says girlishly.
Well, the issue I have with it is the same issue I have with a lot of similar books, in that there's no abject or clear condemnation of the action within the book. In fact, if you read the book without the last chapter, or even with the last chapter, the main character does not get punished for their actions.
Well, let me just read you this. This was written in 1985 when he was writing about D.H. Lawrence. This was him comparing Lady Chatterley's Lover to Clockwork Orange. He said, "We all suffer from the popular desire to make the known notorious. The book I am best known for, or only known for, is a novel I am prepared to repudiate. Written a quarter of a century ago, and knocked off for money in 3 weeks. It became known as the raw material for a film which seemed to glorify sex and violence. The film made it easy for readers of the book to misunderstand what it was about, and the misunderstanding will pursue me until I die. I should not have written the book because of this danger of misinterpretation, and the same may be said of Lawrence and Lady Chatterley's Lover." So I don't know. When he himself is questioning whether or not he's done a good job of separating it, I think it shows that it was never intentional to glorify, but it kind of goes to him almost questioning something which is present in the book, where the question of Alex's love of classical music and whether or not high art will influence the morals of the participant. He's almost reflecting on it himself with his own art. So I don't know. There's a lot of meta conversations going on with Burgess.
I'm pretty sure he had one of the things he had in mind was the famous, Nazi camp guards with classical, who loved classical music. Yeah. Sort of thing. That who had these digs where they had lovely paintings and beautiful libraries and right. And again, I think it's part of it is that's not enough. I mean, God is referenced actually a number of times.
Yes, we didn't touch on this, but God is never referenced on his own. It's always Bog or God, or Bog and God, which was interesting. It's always combined with that other, alternative.
Bog is of course Russian for God.
Yeah.
But it might sound to people who don't know that they might think that it's sort of filthy or something, it's bog. Mm-hmm. But I mean, that might be there. It's possible that that is there because of that possible misinterpretation, like he's playing with the different, the different senses. But it is Russian. I feel like there are some crazy moments where, for example, he references the crucifixion and imagines himself as the centurion.
Yeah, it might be the most blasphemous thing that you could imagine.
Yeah. But that's the point. I mean, he just is a really good writer. He draws this character who is like very, very convincing as a psychopath.
Mm-hmm.
And then writes an entire book in which she glorifies his actions and excuses them.
I don't think he does.
No, I don't.
I don't know where he excuses it. I could understand that where you're saying that he doesn't actually get properly punished, but I think that's kind of the point.
Well, that is the point, and that's why the book is not one I'd recommend people to read.
It's ambivalent. It's not an endorsement. And it's a little to expect like novelists to spank their naughty characters. I think that's a little too simple.
Yeah, but Alex gets away with it, except he's being a little bit of torture. But he kills, or better, murders people too, at least rapes. or does the in and out game and gets mostly away with it with a cushy job. So
Because some
Yeah.
people do.
yeah,
That's not a story that needs to be disseminated broadly or made into a Hollywood movie.
Some
Well,
of those people actually become president of the United States.
Dun, 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 dun,
Look,
dun.
It kind of reminds me like Natural Born Killers, you know, where it portrays something that's very bad, but it's because it's doing the
But it's-
commentary on it, and yeah.
yeah, I
it's-
don't. You can't commentate on these things without having it as a central part of it. But it's what spins off of the. It's the other elements involved that, to me, make it not an endorsement. It's using that as the centerpiece of the story, but everything else that branches off from it, the amount of questions it asks using this as the basis, I think it justifies it.
Yeah.
It's a bit like SJW levels of awareness, and then putting out a video where you don't really add any extra things. You just show the thing, and merely showing the thing is what, you know. And then you expect the reader to throw their to put their kind of thoughts
Yeah, the
onto
reader
it.
is-
It's active engagement with literature.
Yeah.
You know,
But this-
The reader is
some people
captivated.
some people aren't capable of it, but not every book is for every person. So they can.
I
Yeah,
understand that, and that's kind of my point. I'm a libertarian, and I'm a free speech absolutist, and I still believe that there are things that should be embraced in popular culture, and there are things that should be condemned by popular culture. And this book is nothing but a vehicle to destroy innocence. And I don't see that as something to be valued or widely disseminated. I see value in it existing. I see value in it being studied, but I only see such value in it being studied by people who are aware of the consequences of that study and aware of the context in which it should be reviewed.
I totally agree with you. This shouldn't be read
That's-
by people that are too stupid to read into books.
And it shouldn't be issued to 15-year-olds as like must read or something like that. I agree.
Yeah, that is all. Yeah, when I was reading through the Wikipedia and there were schools banning it from the curriculum. Yeah, okay, that to me I can kind of understand, because you don't really want to be showing a 15-year-old this 15-year-old. So yeah, that's fine. But to me, once you've got a certain awareness of how you can interact with this medium, then I think it's valuable.
And plus, because the aesthetics are very appealing, aren't they? Especially when it comes to the film, you know, it looks cool. You know, it must have been covered by hundreds of people in Halloween costumes, you know, since the day it was released.
Yeah.
But I think the classic music is a turn down for a lot of modern younglings, because then they don't know how hard it is to play proper classical music, or even make an orchestra out of it.
Well, the issue for me is mostly the echoes that we see in popular culture. I mean, when Bart Simpson is walking around wearing the same outfit as Alex, that's not that's not condemnation of Alex.
Yeah.
Well,
I can agree with you.
it's the movie.
It was Maggie, wasn't it?
Was it?
Yeah, there's definitely an episode where Maggie does the whole, face down eyelash thing.
I don't know. It's been a while since I've seen The Simpsons.
It was a long time ago, but I remember it. With playing the music, you know.
One of the bullies in The Simpsons.
No, it was Maggie. I'm pretty sure it's Maggie.
Oh, okay. Actually, Maggie.
Well, so Bart was Alex. Nelson was Dim.
Oh yeah, I remember that bit now. Yeah.
I'm curious.
Who's
Whilst we're
racing?
on, that was me. Whilst we're on, running away from Brandy. No, whilst we're on this, because I can agree with you if we're saying that it's not for everyone, but the people that have an ability to appreciate it, I think should read it. What do you think about some of the other things that we've covered? I know your opinion on some of them, but the one I'm most interested in is Lord of the Flies. Do you think that is valuable in the pop culture or not?
I do, because Lord of the Flies has, again,
There's a reckoning.
There's a reckoning, and the main character through which it's channeled grows and realizes and understands the consequences of their previous actions. And there's a so if a Clockwork Orange were written from the perspective of Alex, and Alex were so in that last chapter, if instead of it being a glorious return to psychopathy, instead it were a condemnation of this previous psychopathy and the return to and embracing of I don't know, not being a psychopath and empathy, I guess, then I would recommend the book. It's the conclusion that is the problem, not the content of the book.
I mean, his heart was never really in the psychopathy the second time round.
Correct, and that was because he got bored with it. Which, again, almost always happens to psychopaths unless they keep escalating.
Well, okay.
I mean, this is classic human psychology, and there's. Remember when I was talking about earlier about the natural consequences of government programs, in that they work at the margins to expand the scope of the problem, because they reward people who were trying to make a decision and then they made the wrong decision because it was buffered by a program of the state. So now we have more people making that wrong decision than were previously.
Yeah, no, I'm on. I think now that you've explained it, I'm on the same page. I think that there should be a healthier art in terms of healthier moral art. But that this can still exist and can be valuable to study for those that want to. If that's what you're saying, then I completely agree.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to kind of read or watch, these that are kind of depictions of negative things in a value-free way, and then kind of decide for myself whether I see the value in making a judgment on it.
Well, the core question is it's Plato's parable of the cave. It's the Nietzschean stare into the abyss.
Yeah, I get that.
Introducing these ideas is dangerous.
Ideas are dangerous,
and for some people more than others, I guess.
Especially if the idea doesn't come with a set of instructions on context and what it should and shouldn't be used to venerate.
Well, it's if you've got no cultural counterbalance to this. If all you're consuming art-wise is a Clockwork Orange and Fight Club and American
Serotonin.
Psycho and Serotonin, then yeah, you've got no counterweight to that. Then yeah, I do think I think that's an unhealthy position to be in. But if you've got a baseline of morality, how to handle more difficult literature, then yeah, I think it's great.
And it seems that the last 40 years of pedagogy has served to destroy or at least weaken the foundational morality of society, which is why I'm concerned about things of this nature.
Yeah, I agree. And I think maybe it's because, to me, I think it matters less with this, because if we're going to be honest, it doesn't matter what books are out there because no one bloody reads anymore. So when it comes to art,
but to his point, Brandon, do you think this is more of a symptom, or is this the problem itself?
This book, in and of itself, is neither symptom nor problem, because it's a book. It was a niche book. It was something that would probably be studied by people who were significantly well advanced of the average person in society. The problem was Kubrick's movie.
Mhm.
Yeah, just to give you an indication, when I was looking through, by the late '60s, that even though there were mixed reviews on it, that people were writing about it, there were still only about 5,000 copies sold. It was Kubrick's film that made this the household name.
Yeah, but I mean the message that's in it contained. Are they the problem or are they a symptom of the problem? Same old, same old.
I think it just describes things. It describes conditions. It describes mentality. It's diagnostic. It's hardly a manual. The kind of people who actually go out and commit violence are not, studying novels in order to get there. So it's for us to think about.
Well, you'd be surprised. On the high end, there actually are. There's some psychopaths, somewhere there's a siren going off. They actually learn from their mistakes, and they improve themselves to get better. So there is a small contingent on psychopaths that actually try to get better at whatever they're doing.
And there's also, and this is the secondary concern, which is really the true societal concern, that there are groups who will take this and who will incorporate it into their pedagogy and their worldview and use it to explain away the actions of the psychopaths. So they will enable psychopathic behavior and an expansion of psychopathic behavior. So previously you would see things such as psychopaths being psychopaths, and they were very quickly identified and addressed.
But the book is saying that psychopaths are psychopaths because they're bad. It's not like
yes, but then it's condemning the action society takes to restrict them.
Well, I would disagree with that, because I don't think they ever take an action that is that has any. I don't think in the book they ever have an action that we would agree with anyway. They don't they don't handle the death penalty. So if that's what you want to go for, then that isn't even addressed. So you couldn't use it as an explanation for or against it.
The action they're undertaking is the treatment through which Alex goes,
and it's a complete disaster. So it's not a.
It's a complete effect. It's completely effective. It does solve the problem. 100% effective.
Depends on what you think the problem is, though.
The problem is Alex and his behavior.
Okay, well, I don't know, because if that is the problem, then yes, it does work. But if the problem is that his moral misalignment, then it doesn't solve the problem.
I think it's mixed up. Alex is the problem, and Alex is the problem because he has free will, and the free will of Alex gets cut or reduced or is non-existent because he's the problem. So it gets removed by procedure. So what? Go ahead, Brandon.
No, I was just gonna analogize this to lobotomies.
I was just about to do exactly the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, the problem it gets thrown in there with a debate about free will and stuff, but Brandon is absolutely right. Alex is the problem. He needs to get removed or hindered, something to that effect.
Well, throw away the key.
Yeah, isn't it like the priest?
In the head.
Well,
doesn't the priest say something along the lines of, there's no good in a man who doesn't. He's only not doing bad because he can't, as in, that's not as good as someone who can be bad but doesn't.
That's the classic strongman discussion.
But they're sticking him back out in
Peterson goes
society.
into that.
Yeah.
Putting him back out in society when they could keep him in prison or execute him.
Well, prison is a kind of torture on itself, but that's a different stream.
So two of which we've already had. Like let's
No,
let's
we
conclude.
didn't went on prison. I ordered a lot of books more on the topic of the death penalty, so we can make round 2 and 3 if you want in the future.
Corporal punishment hoe.
We will just become a dedicated death sentence channel.
Only because we've restricted the death penalty that we have, like it's because, or the other way around, we have the prison system we have, and therefore we were able to stop executing people for tons of stuff, not just murder, right? And
Well, it's curious which way round it was.
Actually, it's wrong.
Yeah.
During the Middle Ages, the death penalty shot up because the during the Protestant Reformation, a lot of more people got executed because of a Protestant worldview that is more focused on the earthly thingies. So the Calvinists in Geneva invented prison because they had to put them somewhere and couldn't execute all the people. So this is why you have quote unquote modern prisons. Because before that you had corporal punishment, or you got hanged or executed mostly.
If you enjoyed that segment, please go back and watch our 2 streams on the death penalty. But let's wrap it up.
Okay.
Bishop, you haven't said anything.
And he continues to do so. So, next stream will be in 2 weeks. It's going to be on serotonin.
Just absolute filth.
It's probably.
I just burned that book, so.
Albion. It's properly pronounced C. Rotten Inn.
So rotten
in
inside.
2 weeks' time, we will do The Plague by Camus. And Albion has a temporary lack of. He took the wrong image, so, and he also misspelled Camus. So
they're all French to me, so I don't know.
Oui, fromage baguette. But so see you guys in 2 weeks.
Yep, see you in well, I might be the only one here for this book, so I'll see you in 2 weeks.
I'll be there for the first 5 minutes, and that's about how long it's going to take.
I'm actually going to France, so I'll go and scandalize everyone in France by reading Michel Houellebecq in front of them.
Take your yellow vest with you.
It's very controversial.
C'est bon.
Right.
Au revoir.
Bon voyage.
Horrible Dirty.
Bon noir.
Doei.
Auf Wiedersehen.